Hi everyone, this is Dan Miller, Historical Solutions LLC. I'm back with a video. I haven't had a video for a while, so I wanted to give you a little update on something that had occurred a few weeks back. I'll only take just a few minutes of your time and tell you about my 47 miles with Lewis and Clark coming up. About a month or so ago, myself and three friends and alumni, Frank Helbig, Mike Doherty, and Lou Doherty, the four of us went out to western Montana, and we canoed and camped 47 miles of a stretch of the Upper Missouri River that had been followed by the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Corps of Discovery, back in 1805, 1806. We went there because this was an area that is basically untouched since then, and frankly for centuries and eons before then. It's looked exactly the same as it does now by and large. It's an area called the White Cliffs. It's a protected area at this point. Gorgeous place. If you get a chance and you're up to the task of canoeing and camping for 3 or 4 days, I would absolutely recommend it. But here's the thing. So we went back out to do this 47 miles. It was all downriver in our case. This 47 miles of the 8,000 mile trip that Lewis and Clark had traveled some 200 and some odd years ago. I've struggled to try to pick one thing that I think is prominent and the most compelling to share with you today. And I found it. I have found the one thing that I wanted to share with you. Come back in just a second and I'll let you in on the one thing that I think is at the top of the list from your standpoint, from a leadership perspective. Got a paddle here. Here it is. Here it is. Well, I didn't use this, by the way. We paddled for 4 days, camped for 3 nights along the way for 47 miles. Here's the thing. And that is, we experienced a 4-day trip, and on the 4th day the trip changed. And it changed because after 3 days of canoeing and then 2 nights of camping there in between, on the 4th day, the final day, was a trip very different from the rest of the trip. And it was that way because we knew we were going home. We knew we were finishing that day. We canoed for probably, I don't know, 5 hours or something like that, and wrapped up. Came back to our landing point around 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something. Didn't canoe all that far relative to the other 3 days, but that day was very, very different. It was the hardest day of canoeing, even though it was one of the shortest, if not the shortest day, because we knew what was up ahead. We knew we were going to be finished, and that changed the entire trip. That was the most unusual day of the 4 in the way that it felt. So I got to thinking, in reflecting on the Lewis and Clark journey, 4,000 miles out to the Pacific coast from essentially St. Louis, 4,000 miles back from the Pacific coast to St. Louis. Their journey changed. It was a different journey on the way back. Meriwether Lewis behaved quite differently. Now he had a history, we think, of some kind of depression or something like that. So that could have played into it. But nonetheless, he's a different guy coming back than he was going out. They have different experiences coming back. That's much faster now. They're going downriver once they get to the Missouri on the return trip. So the speed is much, much quicker on the way back. The distance traveled much quicker. There's more tension with Native Americans coming back than there had been going out, I think. So the trip changed from the time they touched their destination, which was the Pacific coast, to the time that they came back. It was a fundamentally different trip then. I think it's true, and I think we experienced that on our 4th day in a little bitty microcosm of it. And so here's my leadership point from your perspective and from mine, which is, especially on things like projects. You know, we start at A and we end up at Z, a project. And we've all been involved in various projects as followers or leaders or both. You know there is a change in different parts and places and segments of that project. Maybe you go from planning to execution. That's kind of the classic change. Or from planning to implementation. That's the change that everybody I think is aware of the most. But there are probably almost certainly other kinds of changes and stages. I would suggest to you that whether you like it or not, and whether you're aware of it or not, those different stages or phases probably carry some different dynamics from a leadership and from a followership, if I can use that word, perspective. You want to stay consistent. You want to stay the same. You want to be kind of steady and unchangeable in that regard. However, I think the reality is that the phases can change dynamics, and it seems to me it's not a great thing to ignore or to be ignorant of those changes. I certainly felt it on our 4th day. Major change in just the feel of the trip. You can look at the Lewis and Clark trip, and you can see a definite change in the feel of the trip on their way back as opposed to on their way out. That's another way of saying that as time flows, there are different stages in the flow of that time, and you have to be aware of the implications of those changes from one phase to the next and to the next, and so on. So that's my leadership takeaway from you, or from our trip for you. There are a million more. Lewis and Clark Expedition, the Core Discovery, fascinating story. I could talk all day about that. I won't. But if I had to boil it down to one, and maybe you think it's an odd choice, this is the one thing I'd boil down. The change from one stage to the next, and how you need to keep track of that in your leadership and in your followership. I'm Dan Miller. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you get a chance to do the Lewis and Clark White Cliffs canoeing trip, I'd certainly recommend it. Have a great day, and I wish you all the best.